some comments and also very good questions from the audience. So Diego, would you want to start?
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank to our keynote today. He made me think, and I'm sure it does not only happens to me. I was reading the comments. I was chatting with Raul during your talk because I couldn't avoid doing that, and I was reading interesting comments from the audience, and I felt a deep identification with those comments, especially with Margarita, Bettina, and Mariana. You made a think, and I think that the first lesson I learned, I want to say first that I will continue thinking after this this presentation. So I think that perhaps we should have done this panel in the afternoon, because things, we have to take our time to think about the things. But the first lesson I learned is that with very simple questions and very simple examples, I think that they are in fact complex to elaborate, but they look simple, and it's really easy to talk with those cases you presented. And the first lesson I learned, and I learned for the compliance profession, is that sometimes we can stop dictating trainings, and we can talk with people and think about these problems together. And I think that will be a great way to refresh our compliance perspective, and at the end of the day, not fail. And if we don't want compliance programs to fail, perhaps what we have to do is to stop and think a bit, and it happened today. But I was worried about how. It's really clear that we have to incorporate the behavioral approach to compliance. It's really obvious, but how? And especially how in our societies. I was reading Mariana, and she was saying, well, if this is intrinsic, well, how can we manage, how can we change our extrinsic conditions if compliance, if corruption is the standard in our societies? So what I really ask, and I want to hear what Raul and our keynote think about this, is if this approach is still valid or has to be adapted to societies with high levels of corruption and what we call state capture, or with our colleague in Argentina, Carlos Nino, called anomie, silly anomie or stupid anomie. I was really asking if this standard still stands in this kind of societies, and how can we approach to compliance programs in these societies in particular. I want to hear what you think, guys.
Would you like me to respond right away, or rather pass it on?
I think
go ahead, please.
It will be great.
Okay. Now the how is certainly a huge thing. When you say that corruption is the standard, I would approach this maybe from the other side. You will always observe that the glass is half empty, but the glass is also half full. So you will certainly have institutions in Argentina where you can be proud to say that they are delivering first-class quality. I don't know which these are, but I've been to China and observed excellent institutions. I see in India excellent institutions. I would be completely surprised if there are none that you find in Argentina where you say, well, we really trust these institutions. So start with them and learn from them what they did. The second thing is it's always worthwhile to have a look at various sectors where you feel that distrust is high. And very often, one of the first areas that you would point to is public procurement. So the level of distrust in public procurement is extremely high. But the problem is that with this high level of distrust, there are huge control systems in place. And quite often, for example, in Italy, the experience has been that these high levels of control were not favorable, but rather that they that in the end people were overburdened with regulations, and when one tried sort of to change the rules a little, in the sense that people knew they were trusted suddenly, procurement officials being trusted, that this was in fact capable of sort of enabling the purchase of better products at lower prices. So sometimes it's important not just to focus alone on fighting corruption, because with fighting corruption in procurement, we would need all these control systems, but have a more outcome-oriented perspective on sort of what do we really achieve with fighting corruption. And there are examples where, for example, some procedures in procurement work better when one trusts a little more, even with the risk that sometimes there is a corruption taking place.
Thank you so much, Johan. This is very inspiring chat. Just to elaborate a little bit more, because this is perhaps I wouldn't say new thing, but rather unusual for our more regulatory perspective on compliance. But I would start first asking to the panel and the audience what actually behavioral compliance what actually means, and I would put that in terms of building an effective compliance system, including some skills for compliance officers at predicting human behavior. And this is, you know, human behavior itself is quite a complex stuff, but it seems that this is not something entirely new in terms of or a different brand of compliance design, but rather another perspective. I mean, how in order to predict how incentives and compliance messages will be processed, right, and acted in the field. So that led us to the question on how, as compliance officers, can introduce these bits, these pieces of behavioral compliance into our compliance program. And perhaps, and addressing one of the questions in the audience about intrinsic honesty, perhaps one of these aspects falls around supporting a context, supporting the culture of the company. So how can we use compliance, behavioral compliance, to influence that context and that culture, and if that actually help us building stronger intrinsic honesty? What's your view on that, Johan?
Yeah, thanks, Raul. I think the points you raise remind me of or sort of highlight maybe two experiences I had from Germany. The first thing is, one big question is, who is actually working in your compliance department? And the big question is, are there only lawyers? And if that is the case, then you might have a problem, because not only it's not only the fact that lawyers have a very sort of perspective on regulatory impact, but sort of that they speak a different language as compared to all the other ones in a company. So when the lawyers speak to the salespeople, there will by nature be a certain antagonism. So you need compliance departments that are broader. So you must involve people from business information systems, from psychology, from management, from economics, from behavioral science. So that is a first important thing, because for compliance, it will be important that the department is seen as a partner by the salespeople. And quite often this is not the case. So only as a partner, they will be able to tap on the experience of these salespeople. And many of them don't want to pay bribes, and many of them don't want to take bribes. So they want to be treated as partners without this antagonism. And when we predict human behavior, then based only on this regulatory approach, we sort of then tend to get it wrong. I had one other point.
You're getting popular at this moment, Johan. Your popularity within this audience is touching new highs.
Oh, thanks so much. So, for example, let me give you one example. I was at a compliance conference with the Deutsche Bahn in Germany, and they were having many of their suppliers attending. And you will all know that part of compliance will certainly be to vet your suppliers to make sure that they are not involved in lots of sort of in major scams, or that they don't pose a reputational or legal risk to your company. But the big problem is how to ensure that. And now there is a completely legal approach, and the legal approach would be make sure that your suppliers adhere to the same standards. Okay, that's okay, but that they also have their own compliance department. So they are fighting corruption with the same level of commitment, also financial commitment. Okay, that sounds fine. However, very often your suppliers are small or medium-sized businesses. So they have 10, 20, maybe 200 employees, which means they don't have the financial resources for a compliance department. Now, how do you deal with them? My experience at the Deutsche Bahn was that they suddenly, although they did have the disadvantage of having largely only lawyers there. So this was their disadvantage. The compliance department of Siemens is much more advanced, and they are much more diverse. So they know better how to cooperate, sort of. But what at the Deutsche Bahn, they have implemented some very good compliance measures. And one idea was that one does not look so much at this systemic level, but one looks at the tone at the top. So that means when you are compliance as compliance officers trying to make sure that the supply chain is working well, then you must trust your salespeople and those who are in procurement. You must trust them with their experience when they tell you, well, these people, they have a very clear tone at the top. And the tone at the top is nothing that you can measure. There's no evidence. But you must trust these people when they tell you, tell me, they really mean what they say. So this is an element of trust that is vital for the good working of a compliance department within a company.